that's for me, living life so merrily. It's so easy, can't you see? Polka, polka, that's for me. Polka, polka, everyone come along, it's lots of fun.
Welcome back. It is May 1st, 2015. Miguel Dorati here, and we are back with the Talk and Shoot Podcast. And we're going to use our time today to discuss the UFC situation with Jon Jones, their light heavyweight champion. I've got perennial guest Mike Davis on here. And we brought UFC veteran Dave Strasser back. More than just a UFC veteran, he's a longtime coach. He's got fighters that are still in the UFC that he affected their earlier career and things like that. So he's going to give us some insight as to what might be going on here. So welcome aboard, guys. You guys out there?
Yep, I'm here. Yes, always, Miguel. Always a pleasure.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. And so it's amazing stuff here, what's going on with Jon Jones. Just to recap very quickly, was in a car accident last weekend in New Mexico. He was in New Mexico about 3 weeks before his next title defense. And the car accident turned into a felony because there was a broken arm involved on one of the other victims in the other car. And Jones fled the scene. He fled the scene, came back to the car, ran away again with some money that he had left, and left behind a pop pipe and paraphernalia and stuff like that. So there were a lot of questions there. It took him more than 24 hours to turn himself in. The New Mexico police had him, they were looking for him for questioning, and then they upgraded him to a suspect, and he finally turned himself in. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a felony with a broken arm, so he's not going to get the electric chair, but...
Well, you know, Miguel, I mean, you got to remember, he's alleging he ran back to get money.
Who's alleging?
Jon Jones. I mean, we don't know what he ran back to get. That's just what he said he ran back to get.
I think some people saw it, though, because that came out before he had turned himself in. He hasn't really made any real official statements or offered any explanations for what's going on. When he was released from jail, he kind of ran from the press. He put a lawyer up in front of the press and said, the guy said basically, hey, we're looking forward to our May 23rd fight. So at that point, there seems to still be some denial there on the part of Jones and his team and stuff. The UFC, shortly after that, stepped in and took some definitive action. They stripped him of his belt. He's suspended indefinitely.
Okay. All right. But
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I mean, let's go back to the original point. It's alleged it was only money. I mean, there could have been other things in that car that he needed to get. Unless they recover whatever it is he got. I mean, the pessimist in me believes there was probably a little more in that car rather than money and marijuana pipes.
Based on his history, it's definitely a question, and one of the questions that by him running and by him not making a statement, he leaves wide open. He's got a DUI in the past, so, was he taking a couple of bottles of booze out to hide it? A second DUI usually means some jail time, depending on what's going on, and he already has one. Was it something else? He has a positive cocaine test, and, in the scope of things, cocaine's a little harder drug than marijuana. Maybe he didn't even grab that. Was it him doing the marijuana? I have open questions about his drug testing for the upcoming fight. Was he tested today? So, that day rather. So he felt, okay, good. I got a couple of days here where I could sneak some partying in. Those are all bad signs. So he's left an incredible amount of questions. I find him arrogant. He was arrogant in the post fallout, after the cocaine test, where there's an inherent. He checked into a rehab clinic and he checked himself out in a day. He's not addressing his problems. That's what's been going on there. The UFC fined him for that incident, an insignificant amount to a guy like him, and now all of a sudden, they book him for a fight. 6 months later, he's going to make millions. He thought and now he goes out and gets into trouble with the law again. So we don't know how this will play out, but the UFC has abandoned Jon Jones to a certain extent, as I think they should. Reebok also has dropped him from the their sponsorships. He had a premier sponsorship with them, and they've cut him loose too. So he's getting hit from all ends. I'm going to leave it to Mike to take it away here and give us a little bit of a different perspective. But that's going over the facts that we have.
Okay, I think he just lost Muscle Tech as well. I think that was one of the most recent things he had lost. All right, well, first and foremost, he's got a $2,500 bond. Now, with a bond that low, the situation and circumstances behind the incident certainly seem very, not only troubling but grave. When you talk about a pregnant woman with a broken arm, this guy takes off. I have been the victim of several hit-and-run incidences, and I will tell you there is very little punishment for the people that do things like that. And his $2,500 fine tells me he's not going to spend a single day in jail. Or $2,500 bond, I apologize. Tells me he's not going to see a single day in jail.
I mean, in the scope of things, like you said, there's a pregnant woman and a broken arm, and all that's terrible and stuff, but it doesn't fall under like life-threatening or anything. Most people would have sat there and faced the music unless there's something to hide, such as would he have failed a breathalyzer? He's had a DUI before, like we've stated. Would he have failed a breathalyzer? Is that why he ran? Is he just got an anxiety problem and he ran? I mean, what can he actually claim as a mitigating circumstance for running like that?
I mean, is he going to use the media? Look what's happening in the media. I don't want to, bad things to happen to me when the police are around. Who knows? And then you can also say, hey, well, let's do a brain scan. Is it brain damage, from punches that he took? Is it erratic behavior based on, some of the concussions that he had received in fighting? I mean, there's a million different ways you can go at this situation and pretend like it's not his fault or try to start fires in other areas. But at the end of the day, this is what he did, and these are his actions. And when people do things like that, it tends to speak volumes of their character and who they are as a person. I mean, Miguel, you were in charge of Bodog Fight. Did you ever do something or ingest something that may have affected some decisions on the business side? And how did you handle it?
Hey, look, I mean, the main thing is that I worry about John because there seems to be a constant growth of ego there. He's gone from being an upstate New York kid who happens to be talented at this to being one of the biggest superstars in the world, making millions of dollars and stuff. And the things that you're able to do when you're young and not in the spotlight at times, you have to let go. And the sign of an addict is really having trouble facing letting it go. Many people just move on and never dabble again, never play with it again. I got in trouble for it. I'll give you a good example. Pat Healy, he failed a drug test in the UFC, but the kid, he supposedly said, he had done a little partying with some friends that he ran into over a weekend. And, and I believe Pat. I know Pat, and he never tested positive again. He let it go. He realized, I screwed up at the big level. And Jones has screwed up over and over again, and he hasn't been able to let it go, from what I can say. And that's a big problem because then, where you were able to handle situations before or you were able to pass it off or pull it off, that slowly deteriorates, and the last person who realizes it is John, I think. Because I've had contact with a lot of fighters over this week, and I'm doing a little bit of research and work and stuff. I'll give you a public example. Brian Stan came out, and Stan's a former teammate, and he said he's not surprised that Jon Jones got in trouble with this. Chael Sonnen came out and a few months back said, mark my words, this fight with Johnson will not happen. What are they seeing that make them make those types of statements? They're very politically correct statements. They're not saying, John, liked to party coke all the time and stuff like that. It's very tame sayings. Just people are not surprised. And that's very telling. Behind the scenes, I've had a lot of fighters. Greg Jackson's school, and that's why I want to bring... Give me a second here. Greg Jackson's school, and it's the reason I wanted to bring Dave in here to the conversation to talk about the atmosphere at the martial arts school, but Greg Jackson School is a factory. I've had contact with a lot of the fighters over there, and most of them tell me they don't want to talk about Jon Jones. They don't want to get involved in that. That means they know something. There's some pressure there. I'm not going to push guys. It's not worth it, but Jon Jones has left a mark where a lot of people question that he's unpredictable. So it's a very interesting thing. Mike, sorry I cut you off, but I just want to wrap that up and finish it.
Dave's got to chime in, absolutely.
Dave, I wanted to ask you, Dave runs his school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Strasser's Freestyle Combat Academy.
Kenosha.
What was that?
Kenosha, Wisconsin.
In Kenosha, Wisconsin. And Waukegan, Illinois. He's my man here. I mean, in the old days, in the late 90s, there was a moment where Dave Strasser was probably the number one welterweight in the world, in my opinion. People will probably argue Pat Miletich, but to me, he was right there. As far as his academy is concerned, in the early part of this century, they produced a lot of great fighters. Several of them went on to the UFC. Several of them have moved on to other schools, for one reason or another. But Dave remains out there. Brian Garrity is one of his co-instructors at the schools too. Garrity was on the UFC's reality show and is generally one of the respected tough guys from the Midwest scene there. And for example, Ben Rothwell, who's currently a UFC fighter, started his early career with Dave. So I want to bring Dave in because Dave's school is very much Dave's life, and he runs it not so much as a business all the time in terms of, let me cut to the chase. Dave, what would you do if you had a fighter with a substance abuse problem that kept, he trained?
Have you encountered this before?
Yeah. As far as knowing the problems right there, sometimes you're so focused on, training these guys up and stuff, you kind of miss those little points or something like that. However, I do have a couple in the past and even recently with DUIs. Just recently, someone came up to me and got his, I think it was a second or third DUI. And he was telling me, Dave, what I got to do, what I do, you know what I mean? Because, I talked to other people, we weren't even aware that he was a huge drinker, and then the driving problem, it's like I said, the second and the third one. And I told him, I said, look, you've got to pay the consequences. I can't rescue you, I can't do that. I think people would be amazed. I think part of my training, and this is one thing that people don't know, when I first graduated college, my first job out of college was a live-in foster parent in Chicago. So I was a 22-year-old foster parent for kids who were 16 to 18 years old who were wards of the state. And now wards of the state are people who had to be removed from their family because their parents were unable or unwilling to take care of them. So these weren't your best kids, you know what I mean? They grew apart.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, and this is something that stuck with me, and it's almost, kind of guided a lot of my life, I had to read and study about enabling. I had to read a book and do a class and all about enabling.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there really stuck with me because these kids, look, it's a hard life for everybody. Nobody, I don't care where you grew up, it's a hard life. And you're going to come into problems, you're going to make mistakes and stuff. But one of the worst things you can do is enable these kids to either continue that behavior or kind of brush it aside. It's easier to do that, but it's harder. And, we've had former fighters, and I've asked them to leave because of a drug problem or things like that, and they wanted to come back, and they begged me. I said, no, this is just a sport. This can live to, there are people who are making a living off it, but you will not make a living if you can't do that simple thing. They've enabled him to continue to make, kind of bypass it because they're benefiting off it.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, Dave, because I think this is one of those things where, okay, I understand that there is a focus and a drive, and also you're dealing with athletes and people in generally in very prime condition. So maybe it is a little bit harder to tell on a day-to-day or in a training. But let's say it's blatant because, my feeling is I don't know if Greg Jackson knows or notices, but Brian Stan noticed. There are people around in the school that noticed. And Jackson's making a lot of money off of these training camps.
Or is he ignoring based on how money he's bringing in?
You know, I've got one business experience with Greg Jackson that makes me think that he's a businessman, that's the number one thing on his mind, and maybe some of that, you know, what happens if he walks in and Jones is doing something in the bathroom or something like that? Does he look the other way? Does he think, Dave, what would you do if say the fighter involved, or you had to take action and we're going to remove from the school a fighter that was bringing you in, you know, considerable money, say 5 figures a month to the school just for training him? Does that change what you would do? I think it changes what a lot of people would do, but what would you do? I feel like, Dave, you wouldn't, you know, but I'll let you elaborate.
That's the issue right there. I know that he's bringing a lot of money in, and it's very tempting, but, you know, you've got to stand on the principles. I mean, if you ever see my gym, it's very small, it's got low overhead, so I'm not tempted to do anything just for the money. You know, so you can make the right thing. If I had a bigger gym, more expensive, and my career livelihood depended on me having this guy, regardless of what kind of problems it is, it's a lot easier saying, looking past it. You know?
Right. So, and Jackson's is a complete business enterprise at this point, where really, I mean, they've got fighters, you know, making millions there. And, yeah, that means he's probably got to pay, you know, a huge rent and equipment and, you know, overhead and the people to watch the place and the whole thing. So does he need, you know, oh, geez, how am I going to pay the bill without Jon Jones? I better just ignore these problems. But then you get this type of thing where there's a huge break. Now, let's talk about what the UFC did. Did they do this too late? Would this have been the right course of action immediately after the cocaine test? Mike, what do you think? Did they do the right thing?
I'd say first and foremost, they just made that weight class a heck of a lot more interesting. I mean, by stripping him the title and putting Johnson
and Cormier.
Jones' first fight back is probably going to be in Sweden. I mean, think about it. He's not going to get an immediate title shot. But based on what had happened during the last fight with him testing positive for cocaine, I have what it did was it exposed the Nevada Athletic Commission, and it made them appear corrupt. Whether they are or not, I don't know in this instance, but it certainly made them appear that way, so it compromised their integrity. The UFC took a whole bunch of flack and appeared to have a double standard in regards to how they handled fighters, and that fight should have been canceled, you know, based on his positive testing. On top of that, like, that was his last chance. Like, that was his last chance. He hasn't even had a single fight from that incident up until this time, and he's in the news again, involving things that, you know, probably also have.
So your opinion is that they should have taken a harsher action around the cocaine test? I think so too. Here's the thing: is, again, you know, cocaine's a drug that has a lot more of a negative stigma. You know, the drug war and stuff like that. And I mean, if you're going to regulate it, you got to enforce the rules. You know, it's a different conversation. I think, hey, let him do it. It's a party drug, and if he wants to do it, and the commission shouldn't get involved. That's a different argument, I think. But now that they're regulating it, what's the point of testing these guys for it if you're going to go ahead and say, well, he was positive before the fight, we let it happen, and you know, the commission has done nothing. The UFC kind of said, we're going to wait for the commission to do something. And the commission has done nothing. They've yet to suspend Anderson Silva, too, for PEDs officially. So, I mean, it's a situation where the UFC needed, I think, to take a strong action in December with Jones. And they failed to do that, sending him the enabling message that Dave was talking about. It's like, hey, you're the best in the world, and, you know, this stuff here, it'll go away. Here, we'll book you for another fight, and you're all set. I agree with you, Mike, to a certain extent that the weight class just got a lot more interesting. Cormier and Johnson is an interesting fight. I give Johnson a lot of credit for taking the fight, mainly because, Cormier and Jones are very different body types and stuff, and hey, people have turned down fights because of that type of stuff. So Johnson didn't seem to care, and I give him credit for that. I think it's a good, solid fight.
I definitely want to watch it.
Yeah, sure. I think, there is going to be that feeling of Jones, being the top guy, and maybe it's a little bit of a watered-down talent pool. But the bottom line is I think you were talking about, who Jones gets when he comes back, and he probably won't get. But, the bottom line is will Jones ever even be back? I think that's an open question. Dave, what do you think? How many of those people that you've had experience with asking them to leave with the gym, leave the gym and stuff and face their problems, how many have actually come back to you clean and really having done that?
You know what? Some of those guys have left. They can. Some of them continued. Some of them are still going on and fighting. But there are other places that would enable them or take them in. Like I said, to get their money's worth or whatever. So to say, he's never going to go back to Jackson. Well, there's other gyms that would jump at the chance to say, hey, come train here, and then, we'll get you in there. He's still going to be a draw, so the UFC is not going to care, as long as they make their money off him. He's going to be able to fight again. I'm not saying not. I just saw the documentary on Muhammad Ali versus Larry Holmes. Muhammad Ali never should have been allowed to fight Larry Holmes. He was shot back then. That was, I think, Furry Pacheco or Dundee refused to work with him. They said, look, you're not ready. You can't fight. And he went about it. He was just interviewing him. You could tell he was starting to slur his speech. They even took him to Mayo Clinic. He wasn't fit to fight. But they passed him. They're going to do the same thing. I don't know if you remember Aaron Pryor.
Oh, my God, of course.
He was blind in one eye, and there was no state except Wisconsin that gave him a boxing license. I think it's one of his last boxing matches was up at Madison. Because he was still kind of a draw, and they let him fight. I think he had one eye. It's like, look, man, he's gonna be able to fight again somewhere. You know what I mean?
Okay, I understand that. And that's so. Even if he doesn't really fully address a potential substance abuse problem or anything like that, he's likely to turn. I was thinking to myself, the UFC suspended him. They didn't release him. And had they released him outright, I wonder if Bellator would have just signed him and said, hey, we don't care.
God, of course.
Because, Coker hasn't really defined himself with being too, like having too much care for who he brings in. As long as they've got a name and some name value and recognition, they bought in a lot of people that, aren't going to make you a top sport mixed martial arts company. So it's always interesting. Is Bellator would maybe be an option for them. The WSOF actually, they have no competition for him over there. I don't consider them on par. And overseas, there's not a lot available, but overseas you can find almost, a willing taker for anything. So I think it's an interesting thing that he could very well not address, the core problem there. It's interesting that you bring up, Muhammad Ali and the boxing things. Muhammad Ali, you said he got taken to the Mayo Clinic. He couldn't even touch his nose. The touch your nose test, he couldn't do it. There was no way his reflexes passed any type of licensing in Nevada, and they allowed it to happen anyway. This goes back, 30, 40 years ago, and there are still issues with the commission. So I think that this overall should say there's nobody in charge. There's nobody in charge of this thing in terms of the commissions aren't going to sweep in. He didn't even get arrested in Nevada. What would the commission could literally say, hey, it ain't our problem. Everybody's going to go ahead and say, hey, it ain't our problem. So very interesting. We've lost probably, he's been generally for the last year been acclaimed as the top mixed martial art pound for pound fighter in the world. And he's now on the shelf indefinitely. His future is in the air. We don't know where he's going to be. And he needs help.
Miguel, that's the question.
Go ahead.
Think about it. This guy fails the test for cocaine, right? And it's not like, all right, you would think, in theory, all right, guys, everyone looks kind of bad in this situation. The athletic commission, the the organization he fights for, as well as the fighter, everyone looks bad because of this. You're going to sit for a minute. We're not going to address it publicly, but, you're going to get your stuff together, and you're going to come back when you and I both feel that you're ready. What do? They book. I mean, he already had his next fight lined up. It was like there was no time off. Not even like.
Yeah, he was on his 6-month cycle.
Not even an internal time off. So my question is, okay, he's suspended indefinitely. Oh, it's temporary. I mean, he's going to fight for the UFC again. I mean, essentially, that's what we're saying. How long do you guys feel he should sit?
Look, I almost feel that if is 2 years right? I hate to do that to an athlete. He's 27. We're going to take 2 prime years out of his life and stuff. But my thing would be this, is I would like to see a sincere effort at addressing a core problem, which might be substance abuse. I suspect that it is. I think a lot of people are suspecting, and I think, the alcohol has come up in DUIs, cocaine has come up in commission tests, marijuana was found by police in this latest incident. So I think that there's a consistent pattern where that's not unfair of me to say. I think Jones needs to address that, needs to sincerely show some type of change there. But who does he report that to? The commissions are going to say no. The UFC can ask him according to what they want in their contract. They have a code of conduct, which he's broken, already many times. But what more can they ask for than, a piece of paper and stuff, Yeah. So who does he answer to? His mother actually seemed, after he left the rehab clinic in one day, his mother was the one making excuses for him, saying that he wasn't an addict and stuff like that, if I recall. So because what's going to happen is this, is you could do, and you're right, Mike, because they actually did it with Anthony Johnson. Anthony Johnson was suspended for some type of domestic violence issue. I don't know exactly what the story was, but there was a domestic issue there where he was suspended. This was right around the time of the same scandals in football and stuff. And the football scandals went away. The players came back to their teams. The UFC slowly reinstated Johnson. Nobody ever mentioned it again. So that one was one where he spent a couple of months suspended. If they try to do that with Jones, without addressing the core problem, it's only a matter of time until Jones fesses up. It's when you're dealing with something like this, it's an amazing thing, because if Jones had a DUI back in 2012, it's unlikely that was the first time that he ever actually drove a car drunk. Getting caught on your first time is, just odds are against it. So he's got a pattern here. He's been in, you know what I mean? It's like if you've tested, he says he's definitely not a cocaine addict. But again, I don't think you did it once and it just so happens the test popped up. No, you've had access to it, depending on the party and the people around you. You've dabbled in it. It has an appeal and an attraction because you haven't been able to let it go, even though everything in your profession tells you that you need to stop with that stuff. So it's an interesting thing. His pattern is there. He's going to fail again, like Mike pointed out. From the coke test to now is less than 5 months, and he's already in another incident before he's even been in the ring again. So it's going to pop up again, and he could suppress it, he could hide it. It could be something where he could fight another couple of years, but at some point, if the core issues aren't dealt with, they'll just pop up again.
Yeah, it's a character defect, and he needs to address it. There's something going on there that's not working. But another thing, right after the initial cocaine positive test result came back, Wes Sims went on one of the I think the Underground blog and pretty much outed a coach. I mean, he stated that Jones' biggest problem is one of the coaches there.
Interesting. Hey, Wes being a UFC veteran and stuff, maybe we can bring him on to talk about this. So, yeah, that's what I mean. He's got to address the problem. But let's go ahead and wrap it up. This weekend is I want to get a couple minutes from both of you since we dabbled in boxing. This weekend is the fight of the century in boxing. 21st century here so far with Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr. Just want to get you guys to make a pick. By the time people hear this, the fight will have happened, but still it'll be interesting. Here we are 24 hours before the fight. Dave, I know you've got an interesting insight on this one. You got to watch it. You have no choice because you're married to a Filipino girl, right?
Yep.
So, what do you think? What are you gonna do? You're gonna root for Pacquiao, or are you gonna play devil's advocate there with the family? How do you see it going?
It's in the best interest for me to be a Pacquiao fan. So
Okay.
But you know what? If I was putting money on this one, I would put it on Mayweather. I just think that, he just knows how to work from the judges to the ring. He really is a good defensive fighter. He's very smart in the ring, things like that. He doesn't lose his cool. He kind of knows what to do. And now Pacquiao's going to fight out of energy and things like that, which could catch, Mayweather. But, I would put my money on Mayweather.
Okay.
But
that's interesting. But no, your heart is with the Pac-Man, though. Mike, how do you see this one going?
I don't think they're going to get the numbers that everyone is expecting in terms of pay-per-view buys. I don't know why. I haven't seen a single sign.
Mm-hmm.
It's like usually they're you see them littered along the highways and stuff like that. I haven't seen anything. Now people are talking about it. Word of mouth, yes. There's not a lot of trash talking. It's weird, man. Like I don't know. Maybe this is what the biggest fight of the century. This is how they go. I don't know. Obviously I wasn't around for Ali Foreman. But I think Mayweather's going to win, to answer your question. I think he's going to run backwards as fast as he can for 12 rounds, and I think he'll probably land 1 or 2 clean shots each round.
Okay, we'll see. That's a dire prediction here because, to me the fact is even if they don't do the numbers that are being tossed out there, they're going to do an astronomical amount of money. And that means I just have to break it down to being a fan above all else, and I better get my money's worth. And I think I can say that for every fan out there. And that means that they've got to do something. Mayweather was talking in the press earlier this week, as they've been gathering there, obviously, in Vegas, that he was coming out to pressure him and that he was going to fight a different fight. But he says that every single fight. So it's time I see it. And I will turn it off in the 4th round if it's starting to look like hot garbage.
Which it can. The likelihood of this thing looking like hot garbage is...
we could put some Vegas odds on that.
It's likely. It's highly likely.
And then you can get into... I'm not a Mayweather fan because I see that he's technically brilliant and he's physically not tested by a 36-minute fight in that if he enacts his style and doesn't have to take damage, he can do that for more than 36 rounds, and he's never even tired at the end of a fight. So those are great advantages to have, but he's never also trying to finish the fight, in my opinion. And I give a lot of value to somebody who's trying to, at the end of the day, it's a combat sport, who's trying to finish the fight within the time limit. So we'll see how it goes. I hope Pacquiao breaks through and stuff. But anyway, guys, I want to thank you. It's been a nice conversation here. Controversial subject, a little bit sad for the sport. A sign of the the modernization of it, where the cookie cutter schools maybe are not taking responsibility for their students. That the way
he's
old
taking a Sonny Liston path too, I might add. It's what it appears. He's going a Sonny Liston route.
Yeah. For more comparisons, but the cookie cut, like I said, the schools don't take responsibility. The UFC had to be, backed into a corner basically to do something, and the boxing commissions aren't going to take responsibility. Jones's entourage has been criticized. The Wes Sims information. I hate to blame his mom, but his mom didn't, send a positive note when she kind of let him off the hook for the cocaine thing and made excuses for him. So John's got a long way to go, and I'm worried about him in terms of, whether he can right the ship without anybody pushing him to do so.